starting the story about compliance, that is on compliance. I think let me start firstly at high level, just indicating as to what is sitting in the audit report. I'll give you more insight on the other areas. We had started to look into whether the institution had complied with the prescript. One of the prescript is about to ensuring that you are preparing the financial statements with no mistakes, and there were mistakes, and we included, we call it material misstatements, which then means they would not have complied with Section 55 of the PFMA. So in particular, what it means is that you have numbers as we try to verify them on the financial statements that do have mistakes, which then they get to be assisted by us to correct those numbers so that they can arrive at an opinion that is unqualified. So those, the list of the components, it ranges from assets, liabilities. Contingent liabilities are those items that you report on the disclosure notes, as in to say, I'm likely to pay a specific liability for over this dispute or over these litigations that I have. We have area, meaning when we audited, we would have found that there are disputes or there are areas that you are challenged with, which one would have expected that you had disclosed the likelihood of paying that amount. Contingent assets commitment, it is amounts whereby you would be wanting to meaning the amount that you had committed to pay a specific service provider, but the service provider has not yet rendered. So those items, including lease commitment, cash flow statement errors that were there, revenue, receivables, as well as just the financial risk management disclosures, needs to be accurate when they are submitted to us. So they were not accurate. On the revenue management side, the key point is about the institution to be able to collect its debt as it becomes due. So when we are saying effective and appropriate step were not taken to collect the revenue that is due, is due to the fact that we have a high value of debtors that have not been collected. So which simply means as much as we can sell, but the revenue that we are generating is not being converted into cash. So then the next area that is problematic in compliance, it's about these two unwanted expenditures, which is fruitless as well as irregular expenditure. It must be prevented. When you have not prevented it, and then it means you would not have taken reasonable or appropriate steps to prevent irregular or fruitless and unfulfilled expenditure. So they still have irregular expenditures that are reoccurring from the previous years. So therefore, they continue not to comply with the prescript in that regard. Consequence management is about ensuring that if you do have those unwanted expenditures or other areas, therefore, that leads into consequence management, you take timely steps to be able to deal with disciplinary processes, investigation, and be able to then deal with consequence management. They still have a long way in terms of resolving the consequence management process that they follow. So therefore, they are still struggling. Even when they have concluded the investigation, they still struggle to action the recommendations on time. And lastly, it is the procurement and contract management, whereby the Constitution as well as the PFMA requires that when they procure, they must be able to procure items in a manner that is fair, equitable, transparent, and competitive. In certain cases where they do procure, they don't comply with that prescript, meaning we don't get, or they would not have ensured that when they procure items that are procured, they are procured in a manner that is acceptable in terms of the prescript. So that is on the compliance, but I then want to expand a little bit on compliance, mainly because we continue with the story of a turnaround plan. You would recall that in 2023, we had said, as part of the processes of building the turnaround plan, it was about to say procurement is one of the factors that sometimes makes the institution not to be able to move with the speed they want. And then they entered into some arrangements which were saying business unusual. Business unusual, it involves you trying to find the faster ways of procuring items that you want to procure. In this case, they would use alternative arrangements like asking the customer to procure on your behalf. Remember, the customer is not going to be subjected to PFMA. The customer can be, according to management, the customer were able to give them the goods at the speed that they wanted. So, however, from the auditing perspective, we needed to test whether such process still adhere to the prescript, or meaning Section 217, meaning does it still assist us to be able to achieve the procurement that is fair, equitable, transparent, and competitive. They could not be able to honor that aspect, in a sense that sometimes when we say, okay, you did procure this item, show me the 3 quotations that were obtained by the customer. How are you ensuring that then these items that are being procured, they are procured at the price that is reasonable on the basis that they have done the benchmarking and then they are comfortable with it? Those processes were not on the ground. Therefore, we could not be able to say, when they were using the business unusual process, it was as much as it could be supporting them from the operation, but from compliance side, then it remained a concern. So that is one aspect. But I also
can you give us just an example of a situation like that where you ask a customer to procure on your behalf? I mean, this is not for the purposes. I just want to see how the concept is in practice.
Thanks. We can give you a few. For example, okay. Lindy will add. I just want to give you one or two. Number one, security contract. You have a service provider whose services are not on par. They are leading to you having security incidents or having to have challenges. Now you want to replace that service provider. And then because the customers are saying, look, we want the rail to operate. And then please make sure that you bring the security service provider that will be able to secure this line. So what then they do is that instead of following the SCM process that we will ordinarily follow, whether it's an emergency or something, no, they ask the customer, do you have a service provider that can be able to come and support us? And then the customer says yes, and then you sign the agreement, and that's it. So that is the tricky that is there, as to say, if you are following that process, so what is the process that the customer follows so that when the goods is brought into you, or when this service is brought into you, it becomes still reasonable in terms of the price that you're going to pay? One can be able to say you are transparent about the process that you followed. So if those answers cannot be given to us, then we have a problem. Linda can cover other examples of these customer step in that were there in terms of the spare parts and the brokerages that would have taken place that requires a replacement with immediate effect. Linda, you can add 1 or 2 points. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. The other example, I think it touches on the locomotives, which is the batteries. So they've entered into a contract whereby the supplier, or mainly the coal corridor, the customers in the coal corridor will go out and procure batteries on behalf of Transnet, and then Transnet will then be responsible for installing then those batteries onto the locomotives as soon as they are required. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so I don't want to be dismissive. I am concerned. So I just, please help me understand the problem that they are trying to solve. Is it that if they do the procurement themselves, it takes long, or what is the issue?
Okay, through the several engagements that we've had with Transnet, one of the concerns that they've brought to our attention is I suppose in their own words, the restrictions that they experience in terms of the PFMA. Because the PFMA is very clear in terms of the processes that must then be undertaken when procurement happens, and you then have to align your then processes and your policies to the PFMA. So the example that I think one of the examples that they made was the cost of time in getting a service provider on board, if I have to follow this procurement process, in their perspective, is not agile enough. It's not quick enough. And therefore, if a locomotive, for example, derails today, that line would be closed maybe for a day or two or a week or so. The process for them to get a service provider to come in and fix that railway line, in their perspective, was not agile enough for them to be able to do those things as quickly as they would want to. The concern that I think we have as the AGSA, it's more around, if you are going to get somebody to come in and step in, we still need to be able to say, when you procured that service, did you procure it in a manner that is consistent with the procurement principle? Meaning, was it fair? Was it cost effective? And so forth. And was it reasonable? So the conversation has always been around the agility of the PFMA in responding to their business requirements. They found that it does take quite a bit longer in doing that.
Okay, Honourable Member.
Now, Chair, I just want to get from your sense of understanding their reasoning. Are they now saying they should be exempted from following the prescripts of the law? Because, one, if you had procured a service you have a client that you have to deliver some goods to, you know that has to happen, and you know that you have to have security in place. So at what point do you then have a situation where you fall short of the requirements of the service you ought to be delivering, and then you want to be exempted from following the law in order to procure that particular service? I want to understand that, because one, there are things that they know. If you are going, you have a client that have secured services for a year, it has to be coupled with security and all other elements that goes with that particular contract. And if then there's an issue of two securities that fell ill or whatsoever, there are also remedies within that contract to deal with that particular situation. What are they saying exactly? They don't want to follow the law altogether? Because even I could say emergency, because an emergency, but they create an emergency. It cannot be, except if then there's a disruption of a cable, then that's an emergency. But things that are long term are not emergency. What are their reasoning exactly?
So maybe Honourable Mente, they've not come out and said that they want an exemption from the PFMA. I'm not aware of that conversation. I think the conversation has always been around the agility of the internal processes to respond to the business requirements. So that's how we've understood what the conversation has been about in Transnet itself. You're quite correct in that the PFMA and the procurement policies that they follow ideally should provide for adequate procurement planning processes such that you know that at this particular point in time, this is going to be my business need and how am I responding to that particular business requirement. But equally, if you then talk about an emergency, right? For example, where there has been a derailment of a locomotive and the line is down, I mean, one would understand that that matter needs to be dealt with urgently. And I think within their policies, then they would then be able to make provisions for those kind of matters. But I don't think they've come out right and said they want an exemption, because that exemption has been granted previously where they did not have to comply with certain disclosures, as you had mentioned earlier. But now I think this procurement policies is more from an agility perspective rather than seeking an exemption. Thanks.
No, so your understanding is that it's a matter of either they are incapacitated to understand what's happening It's a matter of competence. They are incompetent to deal with the space. I'm not getting exactly why they do this, because like a line is down, it's an emergency, then there is a law to deal with emergency. That is covered. But a long-term contract, and then you want to do it other way because it's not quick enough for you, I'm not getting it.
I suppose part of it really, and Bongmusa spoke to it earlier, is an issue around your business processes and how you've streamlined your business processes such that they allow you to have an efficient business running. So those are the things that I think in the long term they need to get to making sure that those processes are in place. I can't answer to the question of whether it's competence or not, but certainly within the business processes within Transnet, that level of agility needs to be brought in the systems themselves.
Okay, so we'll ask them to give us a couple of case studies too, so that we understand the problem they're solving, and why it's not possible to do it themselves. My difficulty with these things is that the PFMA is old. Can't remember how old it is. It's 1998, I think 1999, right? 1999, MFMA 2003. So the two statutes are old. There appears to have been a time in the past when all of this could be done within the PFMA. You understand? And then later on, somehow it can't. So I always want to know, how is it that it could be done before, but it cannot be done now? There are situations where the PFMA really does not assist, where the SABC here, just as an illustration, where the way that content creation is developing now, if there's somebody with a hot YouTube channel, you want to go and get that content and bring it onto SABC, right? Now you must get 3 codes. From whom? You want that show, that one. You can't get 3 codes. There's no other show like it that comes with an audience. So you get situations like that, but I'm always worried when it used to be possible to manage just fine without taking these measures. And then somewhere something breaks, and then we are said, now the PFMA is a problem. When the PFMA has been there all along, right? But we will just make sure that they come and present on this thing, because we do want to see. The concern I think I and the members have is that apart from the transparency, you are still not able now to ascertain whether you got the best price possible. Because that's what that value for money obligation, you now can't, because you said, please. So they then utilize their policies in order to procure from whoever, who may be a brother of the head of supply chain at the customers. You see what I mean? Then it gets worrying. And so that's why we need to ask them to just tell us about this thing and give us 2 contracts or 2 instances where this has been necessary, so that we can interrogate. So we'll ask them to do that. The final thing is, I just wanted to maybe clear up the thing of the exemption. My understanding was that the audit outcomes, in as far as irregular expenditure and this kind of thing, used to be disclosed in the annual financial statement, in the financial statements, right? The exemption was that they must be put in the integrated report, not the financial statements which they publish. They have to publish for the bondholders and so on, because they were affecting the financing terms they would get from lenders. In other words, it would become a hurdle. So the bank would say, but your audit outcome says this on your financials, and therefore we're not comfortable to give you facilities. Alternately, we were going to give you 5%, actually 7.5%, because we don't trust you. That was, am I incorrect in saying that was the issue? It was where it is disclosed, not a complete exemption. Or were there different types of exemptions? Because ESCOM had a similar exemption, also had an exemption. not?
No. So, no, the ESCOM doesn't have that kind of exemption. So, Chair, there's maybe context to that conversation, right? So, Transnet was being qualified on completeness of irregular expenditure. So, what that already tells you is that the processes within Transnet, firstly, to prevent irregular expenditure, detect it and disclose it, were not at the required level. So that already tells us that when they were entering into a number of procurement events, they were not necessarily following the prescripts. And because they were not following the prescripts, when we then audited, we were concerned that you've not disclosed all of the irregular expenditure that you ought to have disclosed. And what that then meant was that we would then have a qualification in the audit report, particularly relating to the completeness of the irregular expenditure. But the genesis of it was really internal processes within Transnet to be able to prevent, detect, and disclose that irregular expenditure. So when that disclosure now moved to the integrated report, what it then meant was that it was no longer impacting the financial statement, but there was still a need for Transnet during that exemption period to then deal with their policies and their processes to make sure that as they enter into this procurement event, they enter them in compliance with the law. So that was the genesis of that exemption. Thanks, Chair.
Right. Thanks. ESCOM did get that exemption 31 March 2023, but there was a big hoo-ha and it was withdrawn. I knew I was correct. I knew I was correct.
Let's say it's not in place.
And what it is, basically, it's what you're saying. So these disclosures were made in the annual financial statements. They were moved to the integrated report. That was, but then it was withdrawn. Okay.
Maybe just in continuing, Chair, with the pockets of compliance issues that we were dealing with there, the other one that we observed, it was a write-off of irregular expenditure or removal. The term that is used now is removal. So for you to remove irregular expenditure, you must have ensured that you follow all the processes, disciplinary step, assess whether you can be able to recover the amount from the implicated officials or suppliers, wherever you can be able to recover it. And then at the end, then you must be able to make a decision. Number one, the first step will be about asking for condonment from National Treasury. And then if not, you come back and review whether on your side you can be able to remove it, meaning the board is entitled to do that. So they did follow the process that says about 86.3 billion, which was almost the old irregular expenditure pre-exemption that needed to be dealt with. And then they submitted to National Treasury, and National Treasury rejected, and on the basis of their reasons. And then board had to apply their mind, as to say, on the basis now when management is saying they've followed all the processes, they've tried to discipline or they've dealt with everything, can we write off or can we remove this irregular expenditure? Then they approved, they removed the irregular expenditure to the amount of 86.3 billion. We then reviewed this process. Our review of this process is that 42.9 billion was removed from the irregular expenditure in the annual report, but they had not finalized the processes of recovery, meaning, and some of it is linked to these locomotive contracts whereby they were still in court and entering into settlement agreements and other aspects in terms of dealing with the recovery of this amount. We then said no. In our view, you would have had to wait for a process to be finalized so that you can know how much are you not recovering, how much are you recovering. For you to write it off before you can finalize all your processes, then it was prematurely. That is where we have come from this position to say the removal of irregular expenditure, you must do it after you have done all your processes, including disciplinary, as well as possible recoveries that you must deal with. So that is the position that we come with in terms of that aspect. But I also want to highlight the bottom row that says, we are concerned with the time it takes for them to execute consequence management. And the tricky is that if you are starting to deal with consequence management 5 or 10 years later, the people that are implicated or that may have been part of that process, you are unlikely to even find them. That is one of the areas that we are saying consequence management takes very long to be implemented. And then if it takes very long, and you will see most of the motivations are saying people are no longer there. I cannot be able to hold everyone accountable and all those stories. Mainly because the matter is now old to an extent that you also lose the information that you needed to use to be able to deal with consequence management. So the bottom box is about the concern that says we are worried about the time it takes for them to deal with this. Their assertion is likely to say because of the capacity issues, meaning they don't have enough capacity to deal with the areas that to deal with consequence management. The last pocket that I just wanted to deposit, which is also one of the concerns we have. When we audit, we ask you to give us the registers of the items that you had procured. Ideally, by the time we start auditing, you must have given us all the registers that you had used to procure the items. The registers will tell us about the items that you had procured, the nature of them, and then we can be able to select a sample and audit. When we had worked on that registers that had submitted to us, we realized that there were certain registers that were not given to us. And then we had to go back to it is the registers that are sitting in the depots, whereby the buyers, it is amount that is not huge, but it is these amounts that are just in the middle of the millions, which does not have to go through the tender process. And then we found that no, man, there are certain registers that you are having because we can see an item is sitting on the financial statement, but it is not sitting on these registers. Then where is the register for it? And then up until we had to go through a new process that says let's identify all these registers, select a sample and test it. When we tested it, some of the concerns that we're observing on those registers, it's about to say when you do procure, when those buyers do procure, they don't procure in a manner that will achieve, meaning the price that is reasonable. Let me just make it in that way. You find that when you ask us to say, how did they test the market to be able to come with this price, that answer is not clear, which then made some of these items, when we probe them further, to be irregular expenditures. All in all, we are emphasizing the weaknesses in the control in terms of compiling the registers, but also enhancing the controls around when they procure, as to say, for us to be able to get the goods, we must get them at the price that it deserve, not at a different price. But that is the area that I just wanted to emphasize on this pocket. I want to pause here before I go to the next slide, if there is any reflection on it.
Honorable Nadenja.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to know if this refers to the financial year under review or it's been ongoing for years.
If I may just confirm with the member, is it the question relating to the registers or relating to premature irregular expenditure?
It's relating to this issue of a customer buying for them while they are moving out of supply chain management.
No, thanks. It relates to the financial year that is under review, but just as a background, when they started with the recovery plan, amongst other initiatives that they wanted to deal with, it was about to say, let's identify initiatives that will assist us to procure in a manner that is faster. So that is, they would have started with these processes around 2023 to say, look, if we want to procure these particular items, or if we want to deal with this item, let's see whether we cannot modify our policy to allow us to go with speed and ask customers to be able to deal with it. But it refers to the procurement that would have started after they had approved that process ever since 2023, but it relates to the transaction that they would have procured during 24-25.
Okay, let me go in the order of the hands. So there was Honorable Maduna, and then like half a second later there was Honorable Skosana, and then a quarter of a second later there was Honorable Neil May. Is that fine? I saw the way the hands went up.
Okay, no, Chair. This customer buying, it's confusing me. Okay, let's start here. You say, Chair, criminality is criminality, and it must be called for what it is. I want to start by asking, is the SCM policy of Transnet in line with the PFMA requirements? That's one. Two, I want to check on this customer buying, because I've never heard of this thing, and I'm trying to understand the system, how it works. Please, just a bit elaborate. And lastly, I want to check on the issue of these registers. I would assume their SCM is decentralized, so they buy at depots. Now, if they intentionally, can you also give me the amount the ranges of their buying? For instance, from until 500,000 verbal, or one quotation from 500,000 to what are their thresholds? And these amounts are at which threshold? And the materiality of what you would have identified. I understand that you were doing it on sampling. It doesn't mean that you picked everything that was not there, because you're doing it on sampling. And just as a comment, Chair, I think intentionally not withdrawing, we intentionally withholding information such as a register of transactions gives many questions. One, they need to publicize. I think PFMA required them to make public registers of the transaction they made each month towards the month end. Did you check if that process happened? Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'll cover the ones that you don't cover. Please just cover the few, and then if there's remaining, I'll cover it. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. The threshold for the procurements at the depots is sitting at 30,000. So any procurement above 30,000 will then go through head office. However, we have noted that there is a lot of activity that happens in that environment. I don't have the quantum of the items. It's something that we can quickly check and then revert to the committee. And then in terms of the procurement policies and whether they are in line with the PFMA, the policies that we've tested are in line with the PFMA. What we have noted is that this particular customer step-in transaction was approved and effected before October 2024, when they updated their policies to then put in this clause. So from October 2024, now their policy actually makes provision and outlines the process that they must follow, which is then something we will be auditing in the 25-26 financial year. However, the one that Bongumusa and Lindwe were alluding to earlier was not factored in, and there were no provisions specifying how they would ensure competitiveness and transparencies in their policies, as the PFMA does require that Schedule 2 entities specify in their policies how they would carry out their procurements. Thanks.
No, thanks. I think just in adding, in terms of the customer, the customer buy-in process, I think Chairperson did cover in terms of the committee to consider to probe more questions on it. We welcome that point, but just in simple term, you are asking the customer to come and buy on your behalf, and then the customer comes, they procure on your behalf, they give you the item with an agreement with you, whereby you sign an agreement with the customer to say, customer, look, if it is a long-term contract, you sign it with your customer, and then the customer will then decide as to how they procure that item, they give it to you, as just in simple term. But I think the committee has been given some information that you can and be able to deal with it, because even on our processes, there are certain answers that we could not get. That is why you'll see in the reflection here, we were saying we worry about whether this process is fair, equitable, transparent. And then that is some of the questions that we could not answer with certainty. But all in all, that is the primarily the aspect that comes in terms of the customer step in. I think Spade did cover the ones of threshold. Thanks, sir.
Maybe on the question around whether there's an alignment between the policy and the PFMA, right? So what we're already saying at this stage is that we are not comfortable that the guidelines that have been issued to support this policy actually align with the prescripts as indicated in section 217 of the Constitution, and those principles in themselves would then align with the PFMA. So already from the get-go, we're saying we're not comfortable with that aspect. I think secondly, for all of these transactions, we were not able to audit them. So it's a limitation on our behalf. And then the other part is to say we also then deemed them irregular expenditure because of the transparency around the process. So they have disclosed that irregular expenditure in the books.
All right, no, thanks.